All right. Weight management explained the right way. Today, I bring you practicing physician Dr. William Summers. He is board certified in OBGYN and obesity medicine. Dr. Summers provides clear, evidence-based conversations on weight, metabolism, nutrition, and modern medical treatments. And we are blessed to have Dr. Summers' time, your wisdom here on Direction, Not Perfection. Welcome.
Thank you. That was so very nice. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'm stealing the mic for 1 second so we can set our audience up for success because they're going to want so many of your topics. And I want them to understand what is available to them, but then we're going to pull some of these back in and nail you down. On
Perfect.
the ones I know they're going to want to hear. So, Dr. Summers has a series, The Science of Weight Loss. And I was just going to label off a couple of your titles because these are all super interesting and everyone's going to be like, yes, please. Understanding Biology and Bias, Why Your Body Fights Weight Loss. Yes, we're talking about that today. Sugar Surprise, we're going to talk about that today. Reversing Insulin Resistance and Lowering A1C, Heart Smart versus Protein Smart. Interesting. The age of peptides, safety on GLP-1s, weight loss meds and safety, and everybody can see like there's no way we'd hit all of that. But you're talking our language here, and I would love to just start with this question for our listeners of why is weight loss so hard? Why does our body fight it?
That is a loaded question. One, as humans, we came from our ancestors and generations where weight gain was necessary for survival. So as generations upon generations developed, we became more sophisticated in capabilities of gaining weight. Our body, I'm surprised we don't walk by food and gain weight. This is how sophisticated. So many roadways to gain weight. And equally, for these same people, anyone losing weight would have been a survival threat. So as we have developed, we have blocked any capabilities of losing weight as a such that that would be a survival threat. So here we are, the first obese generation, sitting on what I say a gold mine of weight gain, easy weight gain, and very difficult to lose. So it's just genetically how we are programmed.
Which would start to explain, because I have a group, I have a membership of women, and one of the things is what we see on social media. Like that person can take a GLP-1 and 50 pounds falls off. That person can eat a little low carb and this happens, and they're going, I feel like I'm doing everything right. I'm moving, I'm eating more clean than I've ever ate, and yet here I am either at maintenance or even still gaining.
That is a frustration, and I think that is probably just ingrained in all of us because the things we have tried to do in the past, and maybe with some short-term goals, we find very frustrating because whatever we gain seems to be sort of offset by all the weight return. Individually, I would say as a human species, we now know that there are measurable metabolic neuroendocrine chemicals that are messed up in our body, at least four. And when we have these chemicals messed up and we eat, we gain weight unfairly. Medicines now target these chemicals, and some of us are going to be more receptive to a typical, we'll say, a GLP-1 receptor, another maybe a GIP receptor, someone else a glucagon or an amylin receptor. So there is variation in responses individually, but I think the thing is anything that we do, we must continue to do. And that is a frustration. We don't just set, oh, I want this goal weight and then get there and go, okay, now, and then go back to the same culture we came from. But everyone is beautiful at any size of weight, and this is just to help develop a higher quality of life. But accepting ourselves, who we are as beautiful, unique, God made, that's just where we start on base one.
Mhm. Thank you for saying that. I think you do a beautiful job of covering weight bias and what patients are experiencing when they walk into medical offices. And maybe we should touch on that for a second because it made me really like you. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. It's embarrassing to be a part of a profession that allows the shame and blame of someone who is overweight. We understand this as a chronic disease. And even in my colleagues with who are expert in their fields that maybe don't have time to keep up with what's going on in obesity medicine are just falling short because we are all of us beautiful at any size and shape, and we're unique, and our individual differences should be celebrated and not any sort of discriminated. So I'm a big advocate about celebrate the individual. And as far as the shame and blame, you may have mentioned I'm boarded in obesity medicine as well as OBGYN. And when I was doing my recent board reviews, I was so shocked to see that physician offices are the second most common place where patients or people will feel discriminated and shameful. And it's not just in a discussion, it's the way that the medical staff interacts with them, when they sign in at the desk, and the way that they're treated or dismissed. And for a doctor to say, oh, just put your arm down when you're eating, I mean, it's just so wrong. And it
Mhm.
just makes somebody else feel worse about themselves. And that in itself is just evil, I think.
I agree. I feel like the shame piece that you're mentioning, wherever it has been built in, I have a recent example of that of a client who went in for a tooth procedure and ended up being talked to about weight and feeling like, man, did my weight cause this? And I'm like, hang on a minute. This has nothing to do with that. You said it somewhere that it's like somebody who is having strep throat.
Oh,
Do you know what I'm talking about?
exactly. I mean, when we have a model of a definite, exact science that we have a disease in our body, a chronic disease that basically we eat, gain weight unfairly. And now we know this, and there are medicines or strategies to target that. So just like strep throat. If somebody said, if just imagine somebody getting all the negativity, the negative energy, or shame and blame for that, it'd be no different than this disease or any other disease. And we just as humans shouldn't do that. We should come together to support one another, not tear each other apart.
Right, because that shame piece keeps people out of offices as well, which is also scary, whole different topic, but of like getting the lab work done in the first place. One of the things that I think is really great with my clients is when we can break past some of those barriers and get the lab work done. Let's just see our baselines and we can work from there. But there has to be a comfort level with that, right? And I think that's where you're so calming. I wish I could send everyone your way. That,
Well, thank you.
wow.
I'd be glad to see them and remind them of how beautiful they are. And we, like any patient, can go through a history and collect the data to best suit what their needs would be.
Hmm,
So,
hmm.
and in all of this, I always say it's the breaking the habits, where we came from culturally and what things that we have allowed to just be every day in our lives. Some of this needs to be recognized as not the best thing. And maybe we can take what we can individually do and change it for our better quality of health. I mean, just breaking habits will be some of the biggest barriers, I think, in overcoming all of our goals here.
Yes. And I think this is a beautiful time to let's talk about that piece of okay, we have environment, we have biology. Can you break down where you see each piece playing in and maybe how they're all working together or working against us?
Well, if you look at just as a cultural obesity rise, recorded history, about 10% and stable. And obesity is currently 40%. So environment is playing a huge role. And if you see after development and commercialization after World War II, packaging of foods, adding ingredients that were really put into the food so we would be manipulated to buy more food, if you will, that have just sustained over time has gone from 10% to 40% in 80 years. I mean, that's just a whopping huge leap. If a disease went from 2% to 4%, people would respond. And we have matched greater than the pandemic of the mortalities of COVID those years. But 40% obesity. So I personally attribute environment as the biggest, I don't want to say pointing fingers, but the thing that we have to redo or reassess or at
Yeah.
least become aware.
Yeah.
I think there
Agree.
are genetic factors across the board. We are all the same, and yet we're all individually different. And so we do respond in better and worse ways with certain stimuli. And so our individual genetics plays a role. And then there's a whole genetic syndromal sort of contribution that probably covers up to maybe a 20% response rate, different brain receptors. And all the exciting part is all this is being really heavily studied and evaluated and recognize that we can do something about that as well. So if I had to say what's the biggest factor to make a change, I would point at our environment and what we have allowed ourselves to eat every day. When it was farm to table, 10% obesity. It's not farm to table. We have 40% obesity.
All right, let's stick here for a minute. And I do want to highlight everything you were just saying. This is why everyone's journey has to be so individualized. We cannot treat anybody as this lump sum and this all works for you because of your point of we just have to see. We have to see what works for each person. And for any listener going, well, now I'm even more overwhelmed because how am I supposed to know all this? You don't. You just have to know a Dr. Summers who can handhold you through it. So take some peace in that, right? We need you to stop worrying about how to fix it, listeners, and listen to there are answers out there. So let's settle into this piece of, like you said, things were added into food, things were packaged. I really do want you to even talk on the soda, the diet soda, because I've heard you be like, you've lumped them both in the same, like they both cause weight gain. Where I think people who drink diet soda know there's that correlation, but we still, it's hard to understand, but it's diet. Why are you lumping that in with weight gain type of thing? So take your deep dive here. Take as
Okay,
much time as you want.
okay, thanks. Well, I want everyone to understand. Well, I'll start with insulin first. Insulin. And everybody's heard of insulin. What does it do? It lowers my blood sugar. But insulin also is the fat-making hormone in our body. So when we eat, we have sugar in our blood. Insulin takes sugar out of our blood. It lowers our blood sugar and takes a lot of the sugar and turns it into fat storage for later. So I want people to recognize insulin is not just sugar lowering, it's fat making. So if we have more insulin, we make more fat. I mean, that's just, so I want to just start right there. I always say there's two types of sugars. Our body's main fuel is glucose, sugar. And there's two types, and I just oversimplify it. We have the type we call complex carbs, sugars that are in foods, farm to table. The
Mhm.
sugars in fruits and grains and vegetables. When we eat those sugars, with a bite in our mouth, the sugar in that bite has to travel to our small intestine. There's a little bit of a road trip there. And when it gets to our small intestine, there are designated gates where these sugars will be released and transported from the intestine into our bloodstream. And it's actively controlled and it's regulated. So we are just delivering a certain sort of over time controlled amount of sugar in the blood. So we have a controlled release of insulin. And that is the way our body was designed. What we've done now is taken the sugar out of nature. We call it processed. We call it refined. We call it simplify them. But we take the sugars out, and this is what these refined, processed, man-made sugars were put into our foods after World War II. And the reason is what we get is not a delayed sugar response from our intestine. The sugar in the bite in your mouth goes into your bloodstream from the mucosa of the mouth itself, going down the esophagus, in the stomach. These are too rapidly absorbed. More sugar in the blood at once. What do? We signal more insulin, and with more insulin, we make more fat out of that bite. This calories may be the same, but the insulin response is not the same. So we're now packing on more weight. So the types of sugars we eat, I think, is paramount just to understand that. Now, why were they put in our food after they were packaged and canned? Well, it was readily known right off of the bat that we get these sugar bombs from man-made processed sugars. And the part of our brain, the reward zone, the mesolimbic center, where drugs of addiction would be influencing in a bad way for us. These sugar bombs go to that part of the brain and subliminally make us want more.
Mhm.
So it was very obvious. So if you were going to sell food, you put some simple sugars in there, and the people will come back and buy your food again. So that sugar bomb and our reward zone responded. So in 1970, they put these sugars, these man-made sugars, and started linking them together, kind of like sugars holding hands with sugars holding hands. It's called corn syrup.
Mhm.
And corn syrup creates this immediate sugar absorption. It's like the sugar bomb went nuclear. So when corn syrup was in our food, we have this massive amount of sugar load, and we don't get it response because we make this a massive amount of insulin to keep our sugar regulated. But the extra fat that goes with that is just wrong. So if you look at the scale of obesity after World War II in the 40s, late 40s, you get to 1970, you get this just spike going straight up because of the addition of corn syrup. And corn
Mhm.
syrup became the third ingredient by concentration and 70% of the foods Americans consumed. So we see this just super spike rise. Now, when everybody has it, then you don't really have a competitive edge in the marketing world. So if everybody's got corn syrup, then you may not buy that particular brand over that brand. So they created high density fructose corn syrup. And I'd explain this as sugars holding hands. And now let's put some other sugars on their shoulders and let them hold hands. And this became added to our foods later and is now just incredibly associated with increased obesity. High density fructose corn syrup, still in American foods. It is outlawed all through Europe. Even smaller third world countries outlaw high density fructose corn syrup. One, because of its impact on the liver, and two, because it's associated with a huge rise of obesity. So if we're going to eat and we just used to count calories, calories important, how much in, how much out, but to know that when we eat certain types of foods, we are responding and making more fat, then we should. And we've been told for so long they're okay. So I'm a big believer in just become a little bit more sugar smart and find out something that we can do like, well, I'm kind of used to this, but maybe I can change that and make the difference. Because, like you said, we're all uniquely made and we can do something. And I might defend somebody who says, well, I'm just not going to give up my bite of ice cream. Like, okay, all right, but maybe we can give up this other thing instead. But it's not about being punished, grabbing the sink, being hungry and not being able to eat. It's just sort of being smarter about it.
Yeah. I so appreciate you describing it that way because I think this whole sugar talk has come in as more of like the sugar addiction talk
Right.
and the very all or nothing. There's even Facebook groups that are out there for sugar addicts to get off of. And it's like, hang on, there's like a whole nother conversation around sugar that we can take this low-hanging fruit and
Right.
switch out an ingredient in our house.
Right.
Like that's so comfy to hear that it doesn't have to be an overhaul. It can be and maybe will be the more that you keep taking those low-hanging fruits,
Right.
but one step at a time, right? Because you and I witness the real person who can hear what we say, but then they get reinserted back in their real life and
Mhm.
stress happens and exhaustion happens. And then it's hard to follow through with these changes unless they are tangible.
I think that as far as our palate, there are probably so many great things we would enjoy if we are exposed to them. I
Mhm.
don't ever encourage, my favorite meal plan to tell a patient is eat what you like, as you do now, change it, but you have to like it because you have to sustain it. So eat what you
Yes.
like, change it, like it. It's probably the only really meal plan I think that works. And yet there's some things that we can do that we just don't know that take this out, put this in. Just maybe realizing this is so bad, a little effort maybe in the attention in that group of certain additives would really make a difference. What I do see is that when people get results and on a momentum hill going down, they become their own professors. They become
Mm.
effective. They see like, a little something does work because we haven't had a lot to work. And to get some, so when an individual does have momentum, I think that is the best success to get their encouragement, to get rid of some of their past defeats and frustrations. And I always like to say this, maybe it's a little bit slow start with people, but Confucius, who I'm not a Chinese philosopher advocate, but did say it doesn't matter how slow you go as long as you don't stop. And so if we,
Mm.
and there are days, let me tell you, we get frustrated, stressed out, comfort food, and there's that thing we pull to our mouth. Maybe it's not the best, but that's not to condemn somebody or go, why are you doing that? That's maybe they just need a hug.
Yes. Yes. What are we really hungry for? Hungry for social connection or hungry
Yeah.
for a
Maybe
nap or a hug?
that hot fudge sundae.
Yes. Yes. And I love that you're still saying there's no foods off limits. It's just what are we willing to kind of pick at? Can we go back to the Diet Coke for a second? Did
Sure.
you answer that and I kind of missed it? What
Well,
is it with Diet Coke that's so
okay.
addicting?
Well, this is the surprise. And this is when the people that say it's just the calories, it's just the calories. And so we know that in a regular soda, there's like 120 calories because
Hmm.
it's in there. In a diet soda, there are no calories, no calories. 1992, people can Google this, the University of Texas did a huge study comparing it was Coca-Cola. I'm not trying to pin them against any other sort of branded sugar drink, but Coca-Cola against Diet Coke. And the weight gain was equally the same in both of those. So if you're counting calories, how could that be? But the ingredients now, and I believe it's aspartame that's in the Diet Coke, which has its own other stories we could talk about, but no calories. But how can that be? And it's really an unanswered question. Recently, I've read some theories about that. I'll just say, let me just simplify it to my discussion. That Diet Coke will provoke the same insulin as the regular Coke through its artificial
There.
sweetener. So the calories didn't matter, but the insulin did. So
Okay.
that's just an easy way to understand it. That's way
Yes.
oversimplified. But that just being said, calories are important. We can't just eat indiscriminately, but notice that there are things in our food that are provoking weight gain unfairly, and we have been doing them every day. When Coca-Cola, and everybody says they're going to sue me one day because I'm not, I'm just mentioning the brand. They are and were involved in some of the litigations because of the rise of obesity. So if you want to see, like, okay, we have Coca-Cola. If you want to see after Coca-Cola came out in the 1800s, and that was a flat 10%, and because of the sodas, the obesity is going up because of the popularity of a drink with a sugar bomb that makes you buy it again. Now, it was first launched with cocaine. And if people don't realize this, Coca-Cola is named after cocaine. So imagine you formulate a drink and you have cocaine because it's not illegal. And one day they say, oh, this is bad stuff. So we got to take the cocaine out. And what does cocaine do? It goes to the mesolimbic reward zone. We want more when we do it. So, like, well, they're going to lose their little star here. Let's get the cocaine out. But some very smart scientist using a brain scan purposefully shows that simple man-made sugars will create the same influence. So when they took cocaine out with man-made sugars in, they soared sales to still be the number one food industry of all times, even today. I'm not picking on just Coca-Cola, but
Mhm.
going back to where I started, at the time when obesity was on the rise, and some agencies are looking at what's causing this, Coca-Cola's sugary drink was implicated. So what did they do? The best marketing that has ever done. Obesity is getting a public concern. We're getting a little bit blamed, so we named it Diet Coke. It is almost like you're responsibly on a diet, doing something about it when you're drinking the same product that's creating the same problem, as we now know. But I don't like to point fingers. I like to point fingers in a different direction. So I would just say with sodas, if you can give up sodas and diet sodas, that would be a big plus in your strategic goal making here. It would be. But everybody has to do what they can do.
Absolutely. And there's the caffeine piece of it, right? Along with the other.
Sure. And the caffeine can be, I would say, neutral as far as weight. And yeah, it has some adverse events in terms of some central nervous system effects and cardiovascular effects. But I'm not somebody that tells people to regulate caffeine in a meal planning program. Stimulant itself actually is in the part of the brain, the hypothalamus that responds to the stimulant medicines can be a little bit of a lessen your hunger, so to speak. But I'm not advocating it for that. I'm just saying it's not bad for us. I don't think it's good for anybody, but it's not bad in our discussion of what we're talking about here.
Right. If we're already talking about a lot of hard things to change, caffeine's like low totem pole
That-
as far
that-
as.
Look, I've got my caffeine, my black coffee right here.
Yes. Not
That's
perfect
it.
over here, people.
Hey,
It's
not if I
just,
do. That's
yes. So let's stick with the insulin talk for a bit here. Because if somebody is insulin resistant, is there a piece of you that feels like, for some, without the help of, we're going to call it metformin, or without the help of a GLP-1, like they kind of are at an uphill battle until they add an extra tool into the mix?
okay. Yes. Okay. Let me, and I oversimplify this, but even in an academic setting, no one comes after me. And I know this is very oversimplified, but let's just say this. If we get a sugar, as I mentioned earlier in the blood, we need an insulin to remove it out of the blood. All
Mhm,
right. One sugar, one insulin. Now, when we get a little belly fat from wherever that came from, all
mhm,
right, then the one insulin won't do the trick. So now we get a sugar, we need two insulins. But because we had to have two insulins, we had a little belly fat, and now we need two insulins. And with that extra insulin, with the same sugar, we're going to create a
mhm,
little belly fat. So we have one sugar, one insulin. And then we have a sugar and two insulins. Since that causes more belly fat, we have the sugar and three insulins. And that causes more belly fat. So we're going to get a sugar and four insulins. And we keep going up the insulin resistant hill. And
mhm,
up the top of the hill, we got a lot of insulin and sugar. We have two diseases: one, obesity, and two, type 2 diabetes.
mhm,
That's so the insulin resistant hill. So if you eat a sugar, you got to have an insulin. But if you're going to make more and more and more insulin, that sugar, it's just unfair. I mean, you're eating God sugars, but you're getting more dumping insulin to make more fat out of that when you're insulin resistant. So insulin resistance, just unchecked, will always
mhm,
lead to type 2 diabetes and probably
mhm,
obesity as well. So now with metformin, all right. So if you go up the hill of insulin, more insulin, more insulin, I call that insulin resistant. Let's go down the hill. That's called insulin sensitive. So we all want to be insulin sensitive. All
Okay.
right. So how do you do that? Well, if you lose belly fat, you become insulin sensitive. Well, that's a lot easier said than done since 50% of our meals are carbohydrates. And we're going to,
Mhm.
every time we eat, gain weight unfairly. Metformin, you mentioned. Well, what does metformin do? It started so long ago for type 2 diabetes. Before we understood the overlapping pathophysiology between obesity and diabetes. But what does it do when you take metformin and you eat sugar? You absorb a little bit less into your bloodstream from the intestine into the bloodstream, a little bit less sugar. And in the same setting, it makes you a little bit more insulin sensitive. So it's like kind of taking a step down the hill. I say metformin may be a go-kart. Now we have medicines now, and I'm not saying everybody needs a medicine, but if metformin is a go-kart, we have Maseratis. I'm trying to draw the analogy here, not
I love
sponsor
it.
one, but we can come down that hill a lot more efficiently, effectively, and stay put, and that's what we have to do. So that's sort of the advantage of, well, lifestyle changes, recognizing sugars first, behavioral, building muscle to burn more calories. But if you're going to use the medicines, we can still use a go-kart, but we can add a rocket ship with it. How's that?
Yes, I love this. Okay, let's keep going with that. That what if somebody is like, I'm not ready for medicine?
100%.
By changing their food and lifestyle habits, are we back in go-kart mode or are we in stuck mode?
Oh,
Like,
less medicine is always better. Less is better.
mhm,
And I'll just say now when people get on the question, well, if I get on these medicines, will I be on them forever? No.
mhm,
But I mean, I think everyone should say, okay, let's just think about this a minute. What am I doing? What could I do differently? What is recognized? And I think watching our sugars and adding protein is a big bonus here. The protein is the superhero for weight loss so that we can lose fat without losing muscle, so to speak, because muscle is
mhm,
so important for our motor speed. So anybody can effectively do that. And of course, we always say exercise, physical activity, and movement and running and cardio is so great for the heart, but building muscle is so great for weight loss. So if you're going to have physical activity, I always recommend resistance training,
mhm,
like Confucius, slow and steady, don't stop, that kind of thing. But I think everybody should reward themselves with a good sort of concerted effort. I do believe, and I think everybody could agree, that there is a point where that may not be enough for a certain person. I mean, it
mhm,
just may not be. Because if you are already metabolically confused in your body because you're overweight, we all have to eat. And even eating healthy and these movements may not project the result that we could expect because of what's offsetting it in their own sort of systems that we understand. So not everybody needs a medicine, and some people take medicines and that won't work, and they would be candidates. And I'm certainly not a candidate for anybody to have surgery until they at least failed medicine. But the bariatric surgeries have been successful along the lines for resistant people.
mhm. Yeah. And then you and I have even seen the surgeries not always work for certain people, and not just because of lifestyle management, but just because they got some results.
And some variations in the surgical approaches, like the band that was out there, that's just probably not as effective. And when we get overweight, we have some chemicals messed up in our body. And so the chemicals messed up, then we gain more weight. Let's go to bariatric surgery now. The most popular bariatric surgery would be the sleeve gastrectomy, where you take the stomach and just staple a gun across the edge of the stomach and disconnect it, and you leave a little
Mhm,
pouch. That's the sleeve surgery. Well, we did not know until recently that I said chemicals are messed up in our body. A lot of negative influencers live in the upper GI of someone overweight, things that are messing up these chemicals. So as soon as they disconnect the stomach, these people are asleep on the table. They effectively start losing weight because of the normalization of the stuff that was messed up. Now, if
mhm,
you want to do the more extreme surgery, and this also involves the sleeve, and everybody gets the sleeve, you might take your small intestines and disconnect a loop and reconnect it, the Y loop. And now we know even more negative influencers affecting these chemicals live there. So when these surgical interventions are done and you have this massive weight loss is due to the correction and normalization of neuroendocrine chemicals in our body. So if we can use medicines to normalize those instead of a surgery, that's always preferred, less invasive. Less is
mhm,
more in terms of success in anybody's, I think, health world. But the point will be this: normalization of the neuroendocrine chemicals can be done with vigorous intent, adding medicines, and in some people, adding surgery. And depending on the severity of the obesity and the class of obesity, it sometimes requires a surgical intervention. And we're always speaking for a quality of health, a higher quality of health, and
Yeah.
not anything but that. Not to be loved, not to be accepted, not to feel great and wonderful and beautiful and productive. It's literally just to live longer and see your great grandkids and all your pets.
Yes. Yes, it's that quality of life piece and enjoying our time while it's here. It's less about the length and more about the quality for sure, is what you're describing. And I love that we always talk about meeting our future 80-year-old self. And hopefully that self is thanking our current self that we've done well, that we tried. I think I'd be remiss not to take this time with you. Let's go over some health safety concerns. One, you started to mention protein.
Right,
And I feel like dietitians, we're kind of raised up in this conservative world.
right.
So it's always fun to see boundaries. Are we not pushing a little bit with increased protein? And then I also want to talk GLP-1 again. With increased protein, do you automatically go to, uh-oh, we're pushing some protein levels too high? Or are you very comfortable when people are aiming for this 120, 130 plus?
Well, okay. I came from the old age. So when these numbers came out, 120, 160 grams of protein, I was like, whoa, with kidneys and stuff. I am so 100% comfortable now. I understand the physiology better. And when going back to the bariatric successes or no success, correlates highly with those who added that quantity of protein that they push. If you take the failures out, there's a quite of a bit of a discordant with the who had the 120, 160 grams of protein, who didn't. But no, I'm a big believer in that because every time we eat a meal, insulin's going to take sugar and make some fat. And when we make fat, it's called lipogenesis. When we don't have fuel in our body, our fat is going to be broken down back to sugar. It's called gluconeogenesis. And we do this every day. Our body just knows we store a little bit of fuel, we use it, and then we eat again. So when we go from fat to sugar, gluconeogenesis, we must have amino acids for that transfer. Amino acids live in our muscle. And our muscle is really the biggest organ that determines how fast our motor speed. How many calories we burn is so dependent on how much muscle we have. I always tell people if you want to eat a lot more, just get you a little bit of muscle. But
Mhm,
if you want to
mhm.
get in the hole and you can't lose weight, if you lose a little bit of muscle, you ain't gonna be losing more weight. But we inevitably are designed, like we entered when we started out, or genetically, one of the roadblocks will be we start losing fat, we lose muscle, so we don't lose fat. If we lose muscle, everything just stops. And it gave our farmers and gatherers time to kind of get their stuff back together. But for us, it's a roadblock. So when we go fat to sugar, gluconeogenesis, which we do every day, we require amino acids, which live in our muscle. And if we're trying to lose a lot of fat, we're going to have to break down some muscle to get those amino acids. Therefore, the protein. There are three macros, and you're the dietitian, so you can correct me if you want to.
You're
I
doing
like
great.
I like conceptually here. Okay, we can eat a fat, a protein, or a carb. Carb and sugar are the same. If we eat anything fat that goes in our blood or sugars, it's in, it's out, it's gone. Proteins are made of an assembly of amino acids. There's a finite set, they're just ordered differently. Any protein goes into our blood, amino acids, but they hang a long time. The one macro that stays in our blood for some period of time that's decent is an amino acid, a protein. So that's why they say if you want to stay satisfied longer, have more protein because it stays
Mhm.
in our bloodstream. Then the emptiness would signal the brain we need to eat. So this long hanging amino acid. Well, I'm not sure that we know when our body's going to go fat to sugar and when these proteins are needed. But at 120 grams of protein for most women and 160 for most men, all built on muscle mass because men have more muscle mass. I say women have more brain mass, men have more muscle mass, but 120, 160. It almost guarantees that through our day, 24/7, if we would reach those numbers, then we are going to have amino acids in our bloodstream, and we'll use those instead of break down our muscle. And I think that's the key. So, did those numbers scare me now? They used to because they're so, we used to do 30, 40 grams, it's like 120, 160. I always worried about the kidney, but
Yeah.
so I had to sort of regroup my brain on that one. And so I'm a big fan of the superhero protein. And it's hard to get that in a diet without some supplementation. And I would
Mhm.
never commercially recommend any product, but any protein powder mixes with no sugars in them, little drinks through the day,
Mhm.
just even almost forced in some cases, will help reach that goal. It's hard to cook a 120-gram protein day.
Mhm.
Yes.
To really be intentional
Yeah.
for sure. And another piece of your comfort level, I'm guessing, is you get a decent amount of lab draws from your clients as they're bumping things up. Like you can see their insides.
Yes, yes. Just like with any patient with any medical disease, it's always good to have a complete database. It's not a requirement to get on medicines for a lot of people. It's just always helpful to have a baseline for just the concerns we could get into of any adverse events using medicines. But in general, it's always good to see that your liver and your kidneys are working before you do anything with a patient. But as I say that in this context, you could be on a liver and kidney transplant list and still use the medicines we're talking about for weight loss. They don't go through the kidney or the liver. It's good to look at somebody's where they are in their glucose world, because in 1964, an A1C with 5.9 was type 2 diabetes. And after I was a doctor then. And as we go up in the years past, we raised the 5.9 to 6.1, 6.3, 6.5. It's going to 7 in most cases. Maybe half the country is using 7 already. We keep elevating the steps. What is type 2 diabetes? So if I see a 5.9, they're insulin resistant. We call it pre-diabetes.
Yeah.
And the reason these numbers get moved up is really just to manage, well, I think it looks better to control the incidence of a disease and keep it lower by raising the bar. So what I'm saying is the lab work will help us. And then again, for certain just in anxieties of patients, looking at their calcium levels before we get started with some of the issues we could talk about. But lab work, always a fan here to have it. Not required, but always good. And certainly required with any sort of issues that could occur. I
Okay,
mean,
speaking of being a fan, and let's see, do you have one of these too? Like, I'm a fan now of the N bodies, the scales that show us body composition because of, and again, I don't care about scale weight. I want to see, are we holding muscle mass? Are we able to build muscle mass? What's visceral fat look like? So I have a quick question for you on visceral fat. Can somebody be sitting at a higher level of visceral fat and still have a low hemoglobin A1C and not be considered insulin resistant?
yes. Yes, yes.
Okay.
I mean that does exist, and maybe it's a good time to say we're talking about looking for abnormalities in lab work. And
Mm.
yes, when in the cells inside of us that I could explain the pathophys that comes from obesity, but there is a whole subset, the healthy obese patient, the person that would by any measurements and scales and DEXA scans and body mass compositions would be off the chain, but their body is as healthy and normal as anybody else's. Do we need to intervene? There's a big discussion.
Yeah.
Some say, well, this will just decompensate over time, but the healthy obese patient is a real thing. So not everybody that is considers themselves obese or who has obesity is necessarily unhealthy. So I'm going to say neutral because I have to respect, we're all great and wonderful, and I'm trying to make an advocate of having avenues for someone that their quality of life will improve. So if I'm just saying nothing's wrong with you, it's a thing, Google it, the healthy obese patient. Everything is so normal, blood work and compositions.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that they have to do anything differently unless
Yeah.
they just wanted to themselves.
Right,
Okay.
right. No, we're on the same page with all of that. Like, I love your neutral, and I agree with you. I think we have health at all sizes is real.
On that same text, we're talking, I do clinical trials on some of the medicines coming out, the phase 2 trials, and DEXA scans for the fat index is always a requirement. I wish we could do those on everyone because there is, like you just said, you want to see the improvements in muscle density and you want to see less of that because losing weight and losing muscle, that's that look we don't want. They call it, and I'm not picking on any brand, the Ozempic face came out. That's just people who lose weight too fast and lose muscle. You get this sort of, you need to gain your weight back kind of look. In that context, there's a healthy way to do it all, an individual, healthy way that would make somebody just feel good about aim in the direction in a healthy way. It's always about lifting up and not tearing down.
Mhm.
And understand nobody, no, at least I don't ever do anything. You go like, I'm going to walk from here to there. I'll zigzag across the board, go back and then get there. But that's just life and accepting us and loving us and supporting. We need support. We need
Oh my
encouragement.
goodness. Yes. And speaking of support and encouragement around the GLP-1s, because I think this is interesting too, and I'd love to know if you and I are on the same page with this. But when patients are supported, I feel like there's this, let's stay at a nice lower dose and make sure lifestyle habits are all built in and resistance training's built in so we can lose a little and preserve the muscle. And maybe we stay there as long as you continue to lose, then there's why increase the dose? But maybe you have a different opinion around
Oh,
that.
medicines with me, less is always better.
Yeah.
And protocols, when I'm doing clinical trials right now, the manufacturers of these medicines, and there's different titration levels. And if you enrolled in a study, you start at dose level 1 and injection, say once a week, and you automatically go to level 2, and you'll make level 3. And if you can't do that, you may have to be dropped out of the study with some allowances made. But when the medicines are released, that's what the book says do. So now what I'm going to say, what we're talking about is called off-label. The manufacturers have to put out with the FDA certain ways to do this, and they will. Everybody go up, everybody go up. No, 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 no. If a low dose starting level one is working for you, or you are concerned about losing weight too fast to avoid the Ozempic face, I hate to keep saying Ozempic, but you know what I mean, like we all can control that. So it's off-label dosing. And we're always doing off-label dosing with patients. And up to me, less is better. So the option will be when they'll come in and I'll say, well, if you're doing okay, you're losing weight, less is better. They may want to step up. Maybe they have to have little doses that we adjust in between. It's just going up the hill. And the principle really will be as you go up on the doses, you lose more weight. Everybody has control over that. Good discussions, good communication, and let the patient help you decide what's best for them. That's kind of the way to handle that.
Right. And I'm saying this for listeners, not you, but I feel like another interesting conversation that I keep having with some of my clients is that they're like, oh, that mental chatter is almost coming back and maybe I need to increase. And I personally am like, let's play at this lower level still. And the mental chatter, let's start to assess if that is emotional eating that we haven't tackled yet. Like now let's talk some like lifelong sustainable pieces that if the medicine goes away, we're still like, I almost like when it's not working perfectly because it makes the patient still work equally hard versus sometimes if it gets kind of easy, we don't worry about some of those things that need addressed. Are you
Well,
seeing that?
Well, I do. And, I can look at it sort of on a spectrum because when you're starting to get a little bit more food noise, remember our bodies are designed to gain weight, not lose weight. And when we have some success, we're going to be met with resistance because it's like genetically our bodies go, we got to put this weight back on real quick for you. And we always get rebound more. So it's just knowing the enemy here
Mm,
and allowing yourself to just, okay, let's just watch it. And less is better, I think, with medicines. And so to understand, I'm doing something right. My body's getting scared. I'm losing weight. And that's kind of the way if we could talk, but you can go up on that. But when we do something, we are going to be met with little bit more food noise, a little bit more fatigue, and some things that understanding sort of what you're getting into when you get started. But when the momentum gets going, I think people get confident they can overcome that. And there are
yeah.
and there are medicines like the emotional eating is another level. I mean, when we're talking about the metabolic disturbances and the things wrong in our body creating weight gain, well, we also have a lot of psychological influences and the part of the brain, the reward zone that triggers. We've grown up through traumas and stress in life and eat to comfort that. That's a little signal now that synapses in our brain, the emotional eater. And there are interventions for that as well, even in medicines to help turn that noise down. And sometimes there's an overlap. So, I'm talking about the medicine contrave with bupropion and naltrexone. It's
Mhm.
really against all medicines doesn't fare too well. But if you take the emotional eating subset niche out, it works very well. It's like when bupropion came back out as Wellbutrin, and people got on it and they noticed they quit smoking. So they renamed that Zyban so that I got to have that cigarette, I got to have that food. So there is an emotional eating that I don't want to disrespect or not represent.
Yeah.
Anybody on these other medicines that's just like when the noise comes back, it just could be, well, maybe it is time to go up on the dose a little bit because we can go up a little bit, or we could just kind of recognize and see if it gets too noisy or that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
medicines, less is better. There you go.
Yes, thank you. I love this mantra. I'm running with it. As you can see where this conversation's going, what am I not asking you that would be super helpful to make sure our listeners hear today?
Oh, wow. So as you probably know by now, I'll just get my coffee and talk to you all day long about obesity, the disease.
Please.
We just need education. I mean, it's not out there. I mean, like we have a disease model. I mean, tell people in 1941, penicillin was the first antibiotic that we had. If you had a bacterial infection, it's hard to believe. It's just like 80 years ago or long. But if you had a bacterial infection before 1941, you did not get the right treatment. There was no penicillin. There was no cephalosporins. There were no antibiotics. So the first one, penicillin. And so if you had strep throat in 1930, and I looked this up, they got leeches and all these potions and these little things that like what? And not everybody died or anything, but they didn't get the right stuff until 1941. Penicillin was issued in this country. Fleming discovered that penicillin and made that as the first antibiotic. And then from there, we have cephalosporins and quinolones and all the macrolides. So right now, we have the penicillins of weight loss. And they are growing into the broad category like the antibiotics did. So in 1945, if you had strep throat, you better not get leeches I mean, you don't necessarily have to have an antibiotic, maybe, but if you're going to get one, get penicillin. Don't go to leeches. And so, I have to have medicines for weight loss, but don't go to the leeches. There's a lot of leeches that have not really fared too well. So that's kind of,
Right.
and that analogy.
Yeah, I love this. And I love that we have such a smart conversation happening, and you are so able to bring it to these visuals that everybody can be like, I get it. Thank you. I finally get that. That has been confusing forever. So you're really good about that. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Yes. So I will put your series, the Science of Weight Loss series, in the show notes so that people can settle in and get each one of your topics and take notes and all of that, as well as this episode. What are other places that you would like to send listeners that they can sink into your resources?
Okay. First, I created this video series. I mean, when I started managing patients on a larger scale years ago, I would do group sessions and try to educate everybody, and they're all falling asleep. And I just want everybody to know everything. And I was like, wake up, you got to hear it. I want everybody to understand it. I really do care individually for the patients to feel
Yes.
and like somebody paying attention to them and hearing, listening. But so I did this old video. So more recently created, it's called Weight Management, a class with ACT. And this was really for my patients. And then I realized I get referrals from a lot of doctors in the city and endocrinologists. I'm like, what are y'all not doing this? So I thought this is just to educate for my patients and even other providers or anyone interested. And there's 8 10-minute videos discussing, they don't sell anything. There are no links to buy anything. I don't endorse anybody's anything. I'm really careful, like trying not to do brand name things, but to help people understand this is what's going on with me. You mentioned earlier you have a perimenopausal and menopausal audience. We can talk about some things in a minute, but this is just if I gave somebody these videos and they said, I understand, that's better. That's my paycheck. I'm not looking for ads and sponsors. Got a big practice. I would like to be recognized as somebody in the industry with enough education and really cares about it. And
Yeah.
that's going to be a resource and not the voice, but a voice in that community to help educate. So that's what those are for. So then they're there. Now, what resources do I use? The only really resource that I probably recommend the videos, the Obesity Medical Association. It is a scientific organization. There are diet plans, there are meal plans, there's some intermittent fasting and physical activity programs and all the sciences between the things that we could just go on and talk about. But these are good resources for patients and providers to go into say, hey, what's new here? What's going on? And that any patient, Obesity Medical Association, a website. I'm always into like something academic that's not selling you anything. I'm a little bit leery. I could recommend a lot of authors I like. And at the end of the book, if they're going to sell you their probiotic or their thing, I'm just like, wait a minute, did you just convince me I needed it, or is that real? I'm not selling you anything, but trying to say I'm your advocate and your friend and want everybody to love ourselves and love everybody else at the same time. How's that?
Mhm. And it makes it comfy. And I love that you have a resource that they can keep going back to. I keep saying and taking notes because things hit at different times. And your visual of people falling asleep is making me laugh because we can be catching them at like an after work hour when we're educating in our hospital scenario. It's like, man, they could have just pulled an all-nighter and they were forced to go to this meeting. And we don't have their attention. Like, but if you give them a video, they can watch it when they want to. They can have their cup of coffee and be taking notes, and it's so much more beneficial.
There's like 10 people out there with notes and following every word and surrounded by
Yes.
people like slumped over. So I
It's
used
like
to watch
church.
the crowd. Maybe I could intimidate them. It didn't work, but I
Yeah,
understand
no,
that it's not their window that they're learning window time.
no,
And
no, exactly. I
so
love that.
so I encourage like patients that come to see me if they could watch those as part of it. And I get a good feedback. They are honestly just me trying to talk to people and not big doctor words. Like I had a nurse practitioner who was working with me this past week. I said, watch these weight videos. She's helping me in gynecology. She goes, I really love those. You dumbed it down great for me.
I
God sure.
know it's nice even for the medical community because it's just like to hear these things over and over again and in different ways. It's super helpful. I feel like I'm about to ask our last big question that's opening Pandora's box because of perimenopause you mentioned in the menopause sector. Do you pull in hormone replacement therapy within your practice, or do you believe if hormones aren't addressed, then we have a whole element of weight management that we're not talking about?
Okay. I'm going to give you like the evidence base that I know and a little bit of my clinical practice. When I started as an OB/GYN resident in the early practice, we gave every single woman in the menopause hormone replacement,
Mhm.
estrogen, progesterone if they had a uterus, or just estrogen without. Why do we do that? I mean, it's just like, oh, you're in menopause, you're your hormones. I even believe, like, well, I get it. If I was a guy and my testosterone dropped, I'd want it. But every woman got hormones until 1992. Now, the rationale for giving every woman hormones was that they were good for the heart, that women have less heart attack and stroke than men. And this was one of those assumption associations. Women have less heart attack and stroke than men, so it must be the hormones. Let's give all women hormones. Until 1992, the Women's Health Initiative. And the big reveal was that women in the menopause, not on hormones, had less heart attack than the women in the menopausal hormones. So the cardiovascular protection was not female hormones. 1992, the bigger bill. I went, what? I've been giving these for years, thinking it was going to keep them from having heart attack, but the triglycerides are elevated and they might have a heart attack. All we talked about in 92 was breast cancer and the pendulum swinging, and we won't dissect that study. Let's go forward in the question you asked me. Hormones themselves. If I Google right now into any of the OB/GYN books, when you first start hormone replacement estrogen, say, you may have a little bit of fluid retention in the beginning. What I see in my patient population, there's two classes, women on hormones, not on hormones. The women not on hormones say, I'm gaining weight, I need hormones. The one on hormones, I gotta get off hormones, I'm gaining weight. The weight, to me, the overall weight patterns that we're talking about are independent of the hormone replacement. Not saying how you feel, quality, sexual responsivity, all the
Right.
reproductive, but for weight, I'm gonna go back and say I do think they are weight neutral. There are some advantages with testosterone, the anabolic, and some muscle development. But as a rule, you gotta be really careful because I've always said if I were to market a drug and say, this drug will help you lose weight, people are going to jump on it. If I market a drug and say your sex life's going to get better, they're going to jump on it. So I'm trying to be very neutral with hormones and say there's a place where every woman should be involved in a discussion best for her. And do I do the pellets and things like my personal practice? I don't judge anybody that's doing those. I just try to stay more in the evidence-based how it's taught and like these. But compounding bioidentical hormones, yes, if you're going to do them. No more conjugated hormones, no more animal, no more horse stuff. But
Right.
we're going to do them. But I don't want somebody to hear me talking now and think I better get on hormones to lose weight. But I think you might feel better in some ways, or maybe not. But and then we could talk about the cardiovascular risk, which are the real risk here, and the potential cancer risk in situations and the history of limiting blood clots and the liver stuff. I don't put those into the same conversation, but perimenopause and menopause weight gain, new discussion. It's not hormone dependent. Women shift from a gynecoid sort of hip and thigh weight gain through their life. And by the way, that weight has no imposition of negative quality of life. You could have thighs that would make it where you go sideways to the door, be beautiful. But that's not going to affect your quality of life. But women go from gynecoid to android. With or without hormones, women shift to a little bit of belly fat. You can have weight gain but a flat belly, but when the visceral fat occurs in the perimenopausal years, that's when the chemicals change and everything seems to be so frustrating. A little belly fat, you wake up, your belly's bigger every day, not necessarily just through, but also through like I call it a mild insulin resistance, to oversimplify it. So it's the onset of a little belly fat that triggers the frustrations that occur. Look at the profile of women and men. I mean, you can walk down the beach and somebody would say a man would always get belly fat from the day one, teenage years. Women don't really get that until about mid 40s, early 40s.
Well, and so then I feel like listeners will be like, so it's happening. Is it now a medicine? Is the answer to curing that? What's your initial go-to?
What's my go-to? My go-to is become sugar smart. If this is a mild insulin resistance, and it may people and academics may argue with this, but it's sugar driven, and I've been a gynecologist for over 35 years. It's the same sugar doing more damage. And that's when sugar smart becomes important because it's not as important. Remember, when your chemicals aren't messed up, you're just talking about calories. But when your
Mhm.
chemicals get messed up, then the same calories can create more weight gain. So I just say this is where the sodas and the diet sodas and just the simple and processed refined foods that we know will more belly fat, things get worse. So I think the observation association that when the women start to get belly fat, typically early to mid 40s, this is when they feel like their body's changed. And their weight gain will become now android, not gynecoid. And there's not a hormone that we can give you that's going to change that. That I can be certain with.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Yes. Thank you. You answered it for me as far as like we're back to the focus of the low-hanging fruit with sugars and watching
Right.
what our diet consists of, honestly, and look different. And then believing that resistance training makes again, for fat burning reasons, and very important. Where like if people are cardioing themselves, yes, it's great for your heart, but we're missing that major component of fat breakdown.
That's correct. And in the context of our individualities and uniqueness and our same deserving equal respect, this is misogyny in our culture. Men gain weight and men don't like the weight, but women gain weight and they don't like themselves. So
Mm.
that's misogyny driven. It should be the same across the board. And our culture has allowed a little weight in a woman to make themselves be blamed for something wrong or like less confidence and job confidence and sexual responsibilities. So first, I hate that double standard, but it does
Mm.
exist. So
Mhm.
recognizing, okay, if this is going to occur, what can we do to minimize it for both men and women, actually?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so,
Yes.
so I'm not telling anybody not to do hormones. Hormone replacement is an individual discussion with,
Choice. Mhm.
and there's different ways to do that, all types of ways. And I'm not that people who want to do the pellets in the compound. It's just more expensive. I'm the TJ Maxx of weight loss. I try to make what's real affordable. We all have those bills to pay. But if it works for them, I'm all in. So I am a fan of hormone replacement, but in the context of weight, not as much. Although I see women that have had that and do report weight sustainability, and I don't know if there can be association with feeling better. In my academic brain, I would just say I can't connect those dots. But I am a fan if you want to do them, and I am a fan if you don't want to do them. And just be aware of what we know with cardiovascular risk and the other risks, those types of things. They're great.
Yeah, I'm just going to summarize this for 1 second, just for our listeners' purposes, so they don't walk away a little confused. Like, I'm agreeing. I don't think there's this direct link to your point. You cannot say hormones equal weight loss, but I do feel like what I see on our end is, of course, when the brain fog goes away, of course, when the hot flashes go away, of course, when you're sleeping better, these ripples of course, when you're feeling better, it's easier to move, it's easier to make wise food choices because we're in a better mental space.
I
Yeah.
think you said that much better than me. So yes, 100%. I don't want anybody getting mad, but I don't want that to be your go-to. That's all.
Yes. It's a tool.
I'm about everybody living their best life, and that
Yes.
varies for all of us. So I would support any decision, but I'm not sending any sort of negative if you're doing or not doing.
Yes. No, and I hear that out of you. I was just like, let's just wrap this up with a bow, shall we? Before you leave, I like to send our listeners with this last message. If you could wrap your arms around them, if you were praying over them, if you were like, this is one thing I hope that you hear out of my mouth today, if you took away nothing else, what would that look like?
Oh, I would 100% say you're amazing and you're beautiful and you're God's gift to us and you have every reason to shine like any other person. And sometimes we have to support somebody else and be supported, but we are all here together. Martin Luther King said we may have come on different boats, but we're all on the same ship now. And we all should have love and give love. And that's what I want to say.
Ah, drop the mic. That was amazing. You're amazing, Dr. Summers. Thank you so much.
Talking to you. Thank you.